The first time I saw him, he was lying on his side, half buried in ash and breathing so softly you wouldn't know something that size could still be alive. He was bleeding from the stomach. One eye was shut, and every breath sounded like the end of a mountain collapsing. They called him a relic, the last of the albino gorillas of Caliph. A myth, a genetic mistake, a monster. But when I looked at him, when I kneeled next to that 35-foot giant and saw his chest rise just once, barely, shaking under the weight of centuries, I didn't see a monster. I saw a being who had never once asked to be legendary. Just to live. The jungle around us had already burned. Flames had turned the thick canopy into ash and carbon. The riverbeds were drying under the second sun, and the planet's mining fleet had already marked this valley as expendable. They gave us 48 hours before they dropped the clearing blast. 48 hours before whatever was left of Caliph's last forest was gone. And with it, him. I was supposed to be a scout, trained to map terrain, mark clean lines between life and extraction. But the first time I touched his shoulder, and his eye opened, all my training melted into the ground beneath us. That eye didn't flash with instinct. It didn't flinch. It just watched me, as if to ask, "Are you the last voice I'll hear?" I set up the stabilizer field first. It was weak. Old tech, meant for triage, not preservation, but it pushed the heat back a few meters, gave me time. I set down my pack, pulled out the old rations, the med foam, the translator chip I was never trained to use. "You're not going to die," I told him. He blinked once, slow, deliberate. I don't know if he understood my words, but I know he felt my intention, because when I reached for the wound, he didn't move, just breathed, and let me try. The med foam couldn't reach deep enough. His body was too large. The gash was too complex. But I cleaned what I could, closed the shallow tears, covered the deepest ones in pressurized wrap. And when I finished, I collapsed at his side, just breathing, listening. He didn't sleep, not really. He just stared, at the canopy, at the wind, at the dying jungle. He didn't cry, didn't growl, didn't rage. He just waited. The second sun dipped lower, the sky turned amber. And I knew the timer was ticking. 40 hours now. Less? I called base. "We have a situation," I said. "Extraction in 40. Upload data." "There's a life form. Large? Critical?" "Scan says no living fauna registered in Zone 7. "Your scan is wrong." Silence. Then, "Do not delay evac. The area is marked. Containment scheduled." I cut the line. Didn't argue, because I knew this mission wasn't about convincing them. It was about time, and time was bleeding out just like he was. I named him Aru. I don't know why. The name just came. It sounded like the low rumble in his chest when he finally tried to sit up. I placed my hand on his fur, felt the heat, felt the tremor in his limbs as he fought the weight of himself. "Easy," I whispered. He groaned, not in pain, in memory. Like rising meant remembering what it felt like to be hunted by things smaller than him that carried louder weapons. He didn't trust me, not fully, not yet, but he didn't move away. He let me stay close, let me scan, let me clean, let me whisper. And by the time night fell, we were just two shadows trying not to disappear before morning. I watched him sleep, watched the moonlight move across his body and paint him in silver streaks. I tried to imagine what he'd seen, what he'd lost, if he remembered his parents, if he remembered being a child, or if Caliph never allowed him to be one, if he had watched others like him die, or if he was already too alone to remember what it meant to belong. I reached for my transmitter. Personal log, timestamp 2437.12.09. I found something no scan could detect, something we buried before we ever admitted it existed. I don't know if I'm saving him or if he's saving me. I turned the transmitter off and sat beside Aru, watching the wind, listening to the planet whisper. Not yet. He didn't speak, but I swear I could feel his thoughts. There was something about the way Aru moved, how he blinked, how he tilted his head to listen when I whispered stories into the wind. He understood rhythm, not words, not tone, but emotion. He knew what sorrow sounded like. He knew what hope tasted like in the air between two living things. The next morning, he tried to stand. I saw it in the way his claws dug into the moss, the way his wounded arm pulled forward even though the bandage was soaked in blood and clinging to exposed tissue. "Easy," I said. "That's not your job today." But Aru didn't stop. Not right away. He just looked at me, not as a threat, not as a savior, but like he was asking, if I don't rise, do I stop being real? He got one leg under him, then two, and then he fell. Not hard, but enough to make the ground tremble, enough to make me run toward him like I was more worried about him than the planet falling apart around us. And maybe I was, because by then I wasn't just trying to keep him alive. I was trying to give him a reason to want to stay. We shared water from a cracked field canister. He didn't drink like an animal. He drank like someone who remembered being offered things only by people who wanted something in return. But I never asked, not for loyalty, not for performance, just presence. By the second day, he let me lean into him. Let me sit between his forearms while the wind hummed low through the vine walls. I read him the names of the last guerrilla colonies that had once thrived here. Every name, extinct, every tribe, erased, and every record ended the same way. Final specimen, unknown. Not anymore, I told him, and he blinked once, as if to say, then speak for me. I tried. I recorded logs, filed appeals, even sent a message to the High Consulate. All I got back were automated responses scheduling a controlled burn for 23 hours from now. Bioclearance initiated. Zone sterilization protocol is active. Do not interfere with authorized containment. I crushed the communicator against a tree. Didn't care if they flagged the signal. Didn't care if they pulled me from the next mission, because this wasn't a mission anymore. It was a fucking promise. I started building the carrier rig that night. I'd salvaged old harness tech from the crash site 2 kilometers east, rigged it to a pulse cart, overclocked the stabilizer so it could support Aru's weight if I could just get him moving. The problem wasn't engineering. It was belief. Would he trust me if I told him we were leaving? Would he understand that staying meant dying? Would he follow me into unknown light just because I said it was better than the fire behind us? He watched me build. Didn't move. Didn't interfere. Just breathed. Slow. Deep. Present. At sunrise, he reached out, touched the harness, not like an animal testing a trap, like someone saying, if this is how I go, let me go with you. I choked, turned away, because something about a 35-foot gorilla offering trust without words. It breaks something in you and builds something else in its place. I loaded the medical foam, strapped down the power node, activated the transport platform, the rig hissed to life, and Aru, he stood, shaking, bleeding, but standing, and then he took one step, then another, and I led him into the jungle with fire at our backs and no clear future ahead. But we walked together, because sometimes that's enough. We walked in silence, the kind of silence that says more than language ever could. The jungle whispered above us, birds returning to branches, wind brushing through leaves like soft fingers. But Aru didn't listen to any of that. He listened to me. Every footstep I took, he mirrored, not perfectly, not gracefully, but with trust. That alone made every ache in my spine worth it. The clearing rig groaned beneath his weight. My power cell flickered red twice before stabilizing. I adjusted the harness. The pulse straps tightened against his left forearm. He winced, but didn't stop walking. Not even when the blood began to show again beneath the wrappings. He didn't make a sound. I think he knew every sound was one more chance the satellite drones would pick him up. So we kept quiet, and the jungle held us like a secret. 12 miles to the edge of the burn zone. I checked the clock. We had 10 hours, not enough for a full extraction, but maybe enough to get him out of range, if he kept walking, if the rig didn't collapse, if the clearing drones didn't scan us early. Too many ifs. But sometimes, if is all you have. We stopped for water near a riverbed. The water was clear, a rare miracle this deep in the burn zone. I let him drink first. He knelt beside me, cupped his massive hand, let the water pool like a lake in his palm before he brought it to his mouth. And then he did something I didn't expect. He scooped a second handful and held it toward me, like an offering, a thank you, a promise. I didn't cry. I couldn't, because this wasn't a goodbye. It was a moment, and you don't ruin moments like that with tears. You just breathe them in. And remember, we resumed walking. 6 miles left. Every hour, I checked the skies. Nothing yet, but we both knew they were coming. The sky always comes for you when you try to break the rules. Aru stumbled once. His knee buckled. I stopped the rig, checked the leg. One of the wounds had split again. The med tape had loosened. I pressed both hands to the muscle, felt the pulse under the blood, weak but alive. "Not yet," I whispered. "You're not dying here?" He looked at me, that same steady, slow blinking gaze, as if to say, "Then show me the way." I used the last of the sealant, reinforced the harness strap, transferred power from my own pack into the stabilizer feed. The rig groaned louder now. It wasn't built for this. None of it was. But we kept going. 2 miles from the boundary and the first drone found us. It dropped low, scanned twice, didn't fire, didn't flag. But the beam that scanned Aru's body would already be triggering alerts in the system back home. My communicator buzzed. A soft ping. Message received. Unregistered anomaly detected in restricted zone. Prepare for full sterilization. Aru didn't flinch. He just stood still, looking up at the drone like it was a bug trying to figure out what a god was. "Keep moving," I said. "Ignore it." We moved, but I knew, they knew, the clock was lying now. It wasn't 3 hours. It was less. We reached the ridge, the last rise before the deep jungle folds into the west basin. Beyond it, no scan range, no fire radius, freedom. But the incline was steep, too steep, and Aru. He stopped. "No," I said. "You've come this far. You're not stopping now." He didn't look at me. He looked at the sky, at the sun, at the stars beginning to blink through the edge of daylight, like he was saying goodbye. "Don't do that," I said, stepping in front of him. "Don't act like you're the story that ends here. You're not a fucking tragedy. You're not a symbol. You're alive. He blinked once, then twice. And then he dropped to his knees and pointed, not backward, forward, to a grove I hadn't seen yet, tucked into the side of the ridge, shaded, hidden. He began crawling toward it. I followed. Inside the grove, the air changed, cooler, cleaner, and at its center, bones. Dozens of them, white, polished, still, gorilla skeletons, albino, just like him. He sat, reached out, touched one skull, held it in his hand like it weighed more than the mountain we'd climbed. And then he made a sound, not a roar, not a cry, a hum, a single low note, carried through the grove like a lullaby made from everything he'd lost. I didn't interrupt. I let him grieve. Let him name every ghost in his own way. Let him sit with those who never made it to the edge of freedom. And when the hum stopped, he looked at me, like he was asking, "Is it okay if I live when they didn't?" And I said the only thing that mattered. Yes. Because survival isn't betrayal, it's the answer to extinction. We stayed in the grove until sunset. No words, no decisions, just the presence of something sacred, a stillness that didn't ask for understanding, only respect. The wind shifted as the first firebomb cracked the southern sky. A bright, sweeping arc of red cut through the clouds like a god drawing a warning line. The purge had begun. "They didn't wait," I muttered. Aru looked at me, not with fear, with readiness. I didn't ask if he could move. I didn't have to. He rose slowly, his left side dragging. He was bleeding again, but his eyes were locked forward. "Come on," I whispered. "We're not dying in a fucking graveyard." We exited the grove just as the second wave hit. A fireball slammed into the canopy a few miles away, trees igniting like paper, birds scattering like sparks. I switched the rig to high power. It groaned, complained, held. Barely. "We cut west," I told him. "There's an outpost relay 2 clicks past the ravine. If we reach it, I can call an unregistered evac." "Not sanctioned," Khan's voice echoed in my mind. "Don't care." Aru moved, one step at a time, clinging to life, defying fate. Like every ounce of his body was being held together by sheer force of will. And maybe by love, because somewhere between the jungle and the grove he had chosen me, not as his keeper, not as his rescue, but as the last voice he trusted to believe he mattered. We cleared the tree line at full dusk. The sky behind us was fire, the horizon ahead was smoke, and the ravine, it was deeper than I remembered. I cursed. We didn't have a route down. The slope was a 70-foot drop covered in vines and slick stone. The relay tower blinked in the distance, just past the far ridge. Aru leaned into the slope, looked at me, like he was asking, "Do we jump?" "You'll die," I said. He blinked, then pointed. At me, then at the tower, then back at himself. "No," I said. "I'm not leaving you." He groaned, deep, sharp, shoved me backward with one hand, and with his last strength, ripped the emergency parachute from my pack. "Don't you dare." He pushed it into my chest, pointed again. The sky boomed, closer now. He knelt at the edge of the ravine, tore open a section of brush, and revealed a tunnel. Crude, narrow, carved into the earth. A route, a last option, not for both of us, for one. He stared at me, and for the first time, he smiled, not with his mouth, with his eyes. That sad, beautiful kind of smile that knows it's already chosen. I was on my knees before I realized I'd fallen. "I can't leave you." He leaned forward, pressed his forehead against mine, warm, shaking, strong. And then he stood, turned toward the tunnel, crawled inside, and vanished. I ran. I don't remember how, only that the sky exploded behind me, and the ground shook, and my chest hurt, and my soul screamed. But I ran to the tower, to the console, to the signal. I activated the transmitter, coordinates locked. I said nothing, just uploaded the data, and collapsed. 3 hours later, the evac arrived. They found me beneath a fractured signal dish, burnt, dehydrated, alive. They asked no questions. They never do when you come back broken. I asked about the tunnel. They scanned it. It was gone, collapsed. No body, no trace, just heat signatures that disappeared into the deepest fault of Calith's crust. And I knew he was gone. Or maybe he was still moving, somewhere deep below the earth, climbing a different kind of ravine, one made of peace. But the archive did something unexpected. It flagged my report as incomplete. Memory unfinished. Not because I failed, because somewhere in the data, a new signal had emerged. Heartbeat, faint, echoing from far below the crust, tagged with my voice signature, and one other, labeled Aru. I didn't need a scan. I didn't need proof. I closed my eyes, listened to the earth hum beneath my boots, and whispered, "Keep going, big guy." Because sometimes survival isn't about staying on the surface. It's about choosing to keep going even when no one's watching, even when no one remembers your name, even when you're the last. Especially then. It's been 12 years. I still see him when I close my eyes. Not the wounds, not the blood, not the fire behind us. I see him the way he looked when he stood in the grove, tall, strong, unapologetically alone. But finally seen. I left Calith 6 days after the evacuation, returned to station life, tried to forget, tried to sleep, neither worked. Because when you walk beside a legend and realize he never asked to be remembered, only to be understood, you don't get to go back to silence. I filed one final entry, not for the records, for him. Subject, unregistered. Species, last known. Condition, unknown. Status, dreamed. It got flagged. Again, the archive still doesn't know what to do with a story that won't end. I went back once, 5 years after the purge. Calith's atmosphere was clean again. Regrowth protocols had seeded the upper layers. The ridge was still there, the ravine gone. But when I walked through the grove, the one with the bones, I found something new. A footprint, massive, fresh, and beside it, a second one, smaller. I didn't run tests, didn't scan for genetic markers. I just stood there with my hand pressed to the soil. Let it speak. Let the wind whisper. And what it told me was enough. He didn't die. Not then, not there, not like that. Maybe he found another place. Maybe he built something underground. Maybe he healed. Maybe he raised a child. Or maybe he became the forest. Maybe he is the reason Calith grows again. The miners didn't return. The sterilization was never completed because something in the system changed. The archive rejected the order, labeled the region Preservation Zone 01, Cultural Sentience Detected. They don't know how it happened, but I do, because memory doesn't always need approval to write itself into permanence. Sometimes it just stays, because someone once cared enough to say, "This matters." Aru mattered. Loom asked me once why I still wear the old pack, the one I had on the day we met him. It's patched now, faded, but I carry it everywhere. Inside it, a piece of cloth from the harness, torn, stained. Still smells like smoke and moss. Still reminds me what it felt like to stand beside something bigger than myth and call it friend. I told her he sang. not like us, but in his own way. In the hum of his chest, in the rise of his breath, in the silence he left behind that still feels like sound if you stand still enough to hear it. They wrote songs about him now. The children, they never met him, but they dream of him, the great white of Caliph, the one who trusted a human, the one who defied extinction, the one who vanished into the roots and never stopped walking. He's a constellation now, 5 stars in a slow arc named Aru's Climb. It glows brightest in the late cycle, just after the moon's rise, just before the archive goes quiet for the night. That's when I walk the edge of the observation garden, stand at the same cliff where he first tried to rise, and I whisper, I still remember, and I always will, not because he asked me to, but because he deserved it. Because no one should go unseen just because they didn't write their own story. That's our job, to carry the ones who couldn't speak but still showed us what survival really means. I didn't save him. He saved me. He gave me a truth no system could manufacture, no archive could upgrade. He gave me the belief that life, when honored, writes its own ending. And that ending, it never stops.